Hello and welcome to Germany Decides, a special program on the German election brought to you by World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN. I'm standing here in Berlin in front of the remain of a small part of the Berlin Wall. Once 150 kilometers long, this wall divided the country for too long. Decades later, Germany has picked itself up. It has also become a very strong economy. It has also become a respected partner for many. It has drawn special attention too, and with this election, no exception. But there are questions too. Will the country continue with the reform urgently needed for the economy in the future? How will it handle the immigration crisis? Will it continue to be a reluctant leader from Europe? And Angela Merkel, 4 more years, what's that going to be like? To answer those questions and more, we are here bringing you the latest analysis and debates about Germany today and its near future, right here in front of the German Parliament building.
It looks like victory, but not in the manner Angela Merkel was hoping for.
CDU and CSU fought together. We both could have imagined a better result, but we also recognize the shared responsibility we now have for the country and for the future.
Merkel's coalition partner, the center-left Social Democrats, also seem to have been punished. They will head back to the opposition benches.
Today is a difficult and bitter day for German social democracy. I won't talk around it. We have failed our election goal after suffering defeat in our heartland, North Rhine-Westphalia. We have lost the federal election.
A night of celebration for the far right-wing Alternative for Germany, who looked certain to enter parliament for the first time, winning a tight race for third place.
The German government, in whatever form it takes, should dress warmly. We will hunt them. We will hunt Mrs. Merkel, or whoever, and we will get our country and our people back again.
The most likely scenario now, perhaps, a three-way coalition, with the center-left Green Party and the liberal Free Democrats completing the majority.
The Christian Democrats, the Greens, and the left have failed to represent the political center over the last 4 years, allowing room for a new power to arise. We will fill this gap in Parliament. We will take up our seats in the political middle again.
Potential governing partners will be boosted heading to coalition talks. Angela Merkel may well get another 4 years in power, but voters have punished her unexpectedly for her immigration policy. It's not the upset many people thought possible 12 months ago, but seems it could yet lead to significant policy changes for Europe's most powerful government.
And you're watching Germany Decides, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from the city of Berlin. And this is the election night. The numbers came out for the parliamentary election from the center of Berlin with the Bundestag right behind us. We are talking to movers and shakers as well as analysts for the best understanding of how German politics is likely to change as a result of this election and how those changes will impact Europe and probably even beyond. And for now, I'm joined here by Timo Lochocki, who is a transatlantic fellow with the Europe program at the German Marshall Fund. Timo, welcome to our program.
Good evening. Hi.
Great to have you. Election night, of course, we see Angela Merkel, even though her party, CDU, is still taking a lead, but a big loss of 9%. That's quite a number.
Indeed, yeah. You might definitely say that the big loser of this election is Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU-CSU. They came out of a very strong position, above 40% last time. They lost 8%, but the interesting point is not so much that they lost 8%, but who is benefiting. And the parties benefiting are the liberals, the FDP, and the far right, the AfD. And these are two parties which fish in the same waters as the CDU-CSU. They are economically liberal, and they are very conservative on migration policies, which used to be a stronghold of the CDU-CSU themselves.
I see. Things are getting ever more complicated, isn't it? Besides the 8 to 9% loss for the CDU. We also see the rise of AfD, certainly the very far right. And that party has been giving out some very outrageous statements by its party head. What does that mean? Is German society ever more divided than it used to be?
Well, German society is not divided, but rather there's a chunk of German voters which certainly do not feel represented anymore from any established parties.
Well, I would say 13% is quite a chunk.
13%, yeah. Well, but for a division, it would take 50%. Currently, we see that 13%, which is, say, 1/8 of German voters, they feel they have nothing in common anymore with the German establishment. And these voters, to put mildly, shows a middle finger to the establishment in Berlin in voting for the far right.
How is this similar or different, let's just say, coming from the UK's experiences, the Netherlands' experience, France, and even the United States?
Yes. The trend, you could say, is kind of comparable. The parties are similar, but the party in Germany is much, much weaker than in the United States, the UK, or France, or the Netherlands.
Until one day they woke up and that party is getting ever stronger.
This remains to be seen. It will depend on what the established parties do with this election result. Do they find a way, a narrative, a communication strategy to win back, to lure back some conservative voters? The question, you might say, will be, are the German parties smarter than the Dutch and the French parties?
Let's see whether they are smarter. One of the things that's going to test them is whether AfD is likely to be the biggest opposition party. And at this stage, we don't know, because we don't even know how the coalition government is likely to be formed. So if it is becoming the biggest opposition party, what would that mean for the parliamentary debates?
It's a very good point. If the Social Democrats, which came out on the second place after the Conservatives, if they would join the government, this would mean the far right is the strongest party in the parliament, which is not in government. And German voters tend to listen to two actors, the government and the prime opposition forces.
That's right.
Then the AfD has a strong possibility to impact the German discourse to a large extent. You're right.
AfD, right before the election, was talking about Germany for the Germans. And right after the election result came out, 13%, they're likely to get the share of the parliament. They're talking about abandoning the euro, and they're also talking about strong opposition to the migrants and the immigrants. So what would all of these mixture mean if they are becoming the opposition party?
Well, this would certainly mean nothing concerning policies. They are way too weak to impact the German policy, to impact the German legislative process.
Yeah.
However, if they come out as strongest opposition party, then they can impact the German discourse that more and more voters will wonder, well, the AfD is the only voice we hear aside from the government. So people who are dissatisfied with the government will automatically have some sympathies for the far right, regardless of if they really like the far right. Now, the far right would benefit massively of staying in opposition while the SPD joins the government.
So after analyzing all of this, here's the thing, Timo, that is, what are going to be the priorities for Angela Merkel, her administration? Is it going to be economy? Is it going to be immigrants? Is it going to be something else that would help her to decide which party she would like to work with, and therefore AfD will be or will not be the opposition party? What do you think?
This might be one paradox of this election. Angela Merkel came out as strongest party, but
there are many paradoxes, I have to say.
True. But it's not up to her to decide who is going to join her as a coalition partner.
What do you mean?
Basically, currently the Greens are very interested in governing with the Conservatives. But the Liberals, which she needs to form a coalition with the Greens, they do not want to join the government because they came out as opposition. They did extremely well in opposition. They came out with 10% currently, and they are very premature, unexperienced. They would like to sit on the opposition benches. So the Liberals have the upper hand in the negotiations. They can decide if they want to join or not. It's not Angela Merkel.
So it's going to be quite interesting, isn't it? Even if they decide to join. So that's going to be conservative and liberal together on the same coalition government. Who would tell us how fast you can push an agenda as a result of that kind of coalition?
That's a very good question. Basically, I think in economic matters, this will not be as complicated. The Conservatives and the Liberals and even the Greens, they share the same platform more or less in economics. But on certain European matters, they differ. The most important issue is probably how to deal with Greece or Southern European countries. The Conservatives and the Greens are rather fond of being more generous with Southern European countries, while the Liberals ran a campaign on being more in favor of austerity, meaning not wiring money to Southern Europe.
Wait, Timo. You're getting me very confused. I guess many of our viewers as well, because, you know, the German version of so-called conservative and liberal can be very different, let's just say, from that of UK, the Netherlands, France, and of course the United States. So how does that work?
Okay, right. You're true. You're right at that. Okay. The German conservatives and the liberals are in fact both bourgeois parties. So they're both center-right. The German liberals are not left. In other countries, the liberals are left, but in Germany, the Social Democrats are left, and the liberals are to the right, you might say.
That's true.
This means the conservatives and the liberals are actually natural partners in Germany.
Having said all of this, when you look at the process of forming a coalition government, particularly given the previous experiences, let's just say with the previous administration and probably with Angela Merkel the previous terms, how much would that help us to shed a light about how she's likely to proceed this time? What time frame we are looking at? Within that time frame, what kind of obstacles are we really need to watch out very closely?
So now I'm very sorry, now it will get a little bit complicated.
It's already very complicated, and let's make it even more. Okay, go ahead, Timo.
I'm very sorry. We have another regional election in Germany in 3 weeks' time. In a super tiny state.
You mean we have to stay here for another 3 weeks?
I'm afraid you might have to. You might have to stay here for another 3 weeks. And this election is taking place mid of October. And up until then, it's not likely that the parties will try to really communicate about a coalition because they are afraid to alienate voters in this election. When this election is over, in 3 weeks' time, then the Chancellor will talk to the Greens and the Liberals. And if this works, the government should form within 5-6 weeks. But it might as well be that the Liberals do not want to join a coalition, that they want to stay in opposition instead.
Or there are other crises, who knows?
Or other crises, you're right. And if this, say, doesn't materialize, then the Chancellor will reach out again to the Social Democrats to try to form another grand coalition. So eventually we're talking about 2-3 months in total. And even then, the Social Democrats have to ask their members whether they agree on this agreement. And if they say no, everything starts all over again.
This is so interesting.
And we might see new elections.
Are you kidding me?
This is probably a low probability, but eventually, if no party wants to work together, which, however, never happened in Germany, eventually they strike a bargain, but it could happen this time, that the Bundespräsident, the president, will ask for new elections to be held during winter.
This is a very interesting election because you see Angela Merkel, the definite winner, actually losing 9%. That's a big chunk. Meanwhile, you see all of the other parties used to be much smaller, but all rise in different directions and all want to be the opposition party in order to get their voice heard and even bigger among the public. This is very interesting election analysis. Thank you so much, Timo Lochocki, for helping us to understand it better.
With pleasure.
Thank you. And you're watching Germany Decides, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from the heartland of Germany. I will be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching Germany Decides, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you on the election night here in the heart of Berlin. And for now, I am joined by Markus Kerber, former Director General of the German Industry Federation, or the BDI. Sir, welcome to our program.
Welcome you to
Is
Berlin.
this a big surprise to you?
It is, it is.
In what way?
The outcome is totally unexpected when you look at the relative weights of the political landscapes. There was an expectation that Mrs. Merkel's party, the CDU-CSU, would have a little drop of maybe 3 or 4%. But you're now looking at 9%, and what is maybe even more interesting is that in the southern, more prosperous parts of Germany, Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg and other states, the losses are even bigger. You look at 11% in Bavaria, look at 12.5% in Baden-Württemberg, the economic powerhouses. This will cause a lot of rethinking in Mrs. Merkel's party on the one hand. On the other hand, it will dramatically influence the way in which a new government can be formed, because what most people do not understand is that Mrs. Merkel's party is actually two parties.
Right.
It is in 15 states the CDU, and in one very important state, Bavaria, it's the CSU.
That's true.
They have elections in 11 months. They just lost 11% tonight, and they've already said about an hour ago on German television that they will change the political agenda of Mrs. Merkel's party and their own little sister party, the CSU, further to the right. Now, how does that go together with the Greens and the Liberals?
We don't know.
Very confusing.
At this point, we don't know. But the question is, what would that mean for business people like you? I mean, you've been pushing the business agenda, lobbying for them. Of course, that's your job. So what would this change eventually mean for your job and for the business advocacy for Germany?
I think we're joining the club of Western countries now where business has to live with a certain higher degree of uncertainty. We thought that this election would be a relatively smooth home run for Mrs. Merkel. It has proved not to be that case. So we look at least 3 months of a lot of focus on internal power and party politics in Germany and a defocusing on economic events, just in a moment of time where a lot of economic-based decisions will be taken. I bet you in the next 2 or 3 days, President Macron will call up in Berlin and say, can we drive the Eurozone forward? Mrs. May, who's just given an important speech in Florence on Friday, will call up in Berlin and say, how do we go on with our economic relationships between the EU and the United Kingdom post-Brexit? And over and above, we still have big trade issues looming between Europe as a whole and the rest of the world,
so
including
Markus,
China
you're
and the US.
suggesting in a way that, you know, there used to be a role that people consider Germany could play as a leader, or at least a reluctant leader, strategically or tactically speaking, now actually could be diminished somewhat as a result of this quite confusing result of the election.
Well, I would slightly dare to rephrase you and say we could be a distracted leader of Europe and distracted by ourselves. We have to do so much homework now inside Germany to set up a stable government, which has become very difficult tonight, and that distracts
Merkel
us.
is well known for, you know, building consensus, so
That's
maybe
true.
this is her home run anyway.
It'll be a tough nut to crack, to crack for her, but of course she has a lot of skills and she has an enormous amount of experience and she's got nerves of steel. So over the next 3 months she will need all 3 of those to get Germany back into calmer waters and to show the world that we can overcome the rise of a relatively extreme right-wing party and bring the country back into safe and calm waters.
But you know, some of the things are very interesting to people around the world. How much Germany is still committed, let's just say, to globalization with the rise of the far-right party? Of course, it is still a minority, but already giving some voice in the society and probably becoming the largest opposition party, who knows? And secondly, what about Germany's earlier business deals and agreements with the others, trade mechanism, for example? And what about the future potential of trade mechanisms, such as PPIT? All of these become, all of a sudden, question marks. Markus.
Well, let me deal with the 2 questions you just gave me. I think that the rise of the AfD is a phenomenon in all the Western countries because it shows there is a disgruntlement and an unhappiness with at least 10–15% of all our societies with the positive sides of globalization, which for them has been a negative side. There's a lot of feeling of neglect, a lot of alienation, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So that is something the country will have to deal with, and I think we will successfully deal with that by giving people a different set of policy items in the interior setup of German politics, which will put away some of the disgruntlement. There is issues on migration, integration, and other stuff that will be dealt with. Dealing with your second question, I do not think that it takes Germany's willingness to fight for open markets, for better trade deals, global trade deals, for peaceful settlement of trade disputes. On the contrary, I think the country will not be distracted externally by these things here in Berlin, but it will be distracted and sort of costing a lot of energy to deal with that in the next 3 months until you have a stable government.
Possibly a lot of energy, because according to some latest report, AfD's top candidate is talking to the German media, suggesting that probably Angela Merkel broken the law in terms of the immigrant issue and the policies. So if these kind of things are being debated in the German society, who knows how long it would take for things to settle down, for the dust to really go to the places where it belongs to.
Well, I think the AfD is quite normal in terms of other populist parties, that they have a huge gulf between fantasy and facts. There has been a lot of dispute for many political reasons with Angela Merkel, but one thing is quite sure, and the political opposition in the last 4 years has shown that everything that happened was fully legal, but some people may not like the outcomes of that politics, but still 87% of Germans said we approve of the way the country goes forward, and only 13 voiced their concerns and their neglect. And I think that is still a figure that you can easily manage.
That is one thing. The other thing, of course, is different policies that are crucial for Germany and also probably for the rest of the world. Environmental issues, energy issues. We see these parties have very different views about how the energy issues should be resolved. For example, about nuclear power.
Yep.
They have very diverse views, and very likely they are coming into a coalition government. We don't know at this point.
Yep.
So will Germany still commit to what it used to commit? And will the rest of the world trust Germany as a result of this election?
I'm absolutely convinced that the new German government will not deviate from the positions in the very political areas that you've mentioned: environmental, climate change, trade, security, and all the other.
What is making you to be so sure about this?
Because there's number one issue that has caused the rise of the AfD, and that is a misunderstanding and a disgruntlement about migration and integration. And I think there is a common denominator visible on the horizon between the CSU, the CDU, the Greens and the Liberals. If they sort out that bone of contention, all the other things like energy policy, like tax policy, like trade policy, like European policy can be compromised. I think there's this one issue, and if that's been solved between those four parties, then I think the AfD's main political item will fall to pieces like a souffle. And I think that's what Mrs. Merkel's strategy will look like.
But you know, having said all of this, we are facing a lot of uncertainties in our country's politics. And what would that mean from now until the coalition government, if there is a coalition government on time to be formed?
Well, unless you have a new coalition government, the existing government, consisting of the CDU, CSU and the Social Democrats, the SPD, will continue governing. So in terms of executive processes,
but without much steam, because people know at the back of their head there is something there that has to be formed.
Yeah, but they have a budget for next year. The main political things have been decided up until the middle of August, so I think the ship will still be running smoothly for the next couple of months, while behind the scenes they will sort out a new government.
One of the very crucial things, Markus, is the reform. You know, all over the world, people talk about reform. Economies need reform. That is going to give us the new momentum to move ahead. However, Chancellor Merkel been talking about reform without really doing the reform. So what would that mean now for her with even more difficulties politically back at home? Will that be a consensus that she's likely to even move further with the reform, or actually she's going to delay that for even more time to come?
No, I think you will witness in the next 12 to 18, 24 months a lot of reform pressure being eased off by doing reforms in Europe as well as inside Germany. Why? Because a lot of reforms have been pent up by the, as I said before, the number one issue, unclarity and uncertainty in the area of migration and integration policies, because there has been this pressure from the Middle East and from Northern Africa. I think if the main political parties in Germany can focus a consensus on that very hot topic, then there will be the stimulus and the momentum to go back to governing all these other things, including the push for more reforms in economic and in tax and in, for instance, security issues all around Europe.
But you know, of course, there's always an issue about what kind of reform we're talking about here. It's not just the reform itself, right?
Yeah, but looking at the demographics in Europe, all over Europe, not just Germany, looking at the relative power and influence that areas like, or countries like China and the United States and other parts of the world have developed over the last 20 years, Europe has to become a more unified and a more liberalized economic place, especially, for instance, in areas like services. And I think it's the global competitive field that will force Europe to do more reforms, to unlock labor markets, and at the same time secure people who are in the labor markets that their lives will not change dramatically to the negative. I think that it sounds very easy when I say it, but I think the political leaders in Europe have learned that lesson. There's Mr. Macron, there's Gentiloni in Italy, Mrs. Merkel has said it all the way, Mr. Rajoy has been very successful in Spain. So overall, I'm quite positive.
We hope that will be true. Markus Kerber, thank you so much for being with us. I know you have a big day already today, so I hope you have some rest.
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And you're watching Germany Decides, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN. We'll be back after this. And welcome back. You're watching Germany Decides, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei here from the heart of Berlin. Once again, we're joined in our panel Timo Lochocki, who is a transatlantic fellow with the Europe program at the German Marshall Fund, and Markus Kerber, former Director General of the German Industry Federation, BDI. And we want to approach some of the most important regional and probably global issues in which Germany could play a role. And we wonder, what would this mean, this election, for Germany's role in the future? Let me begin with you, Mr. Lochocki. Chinese President Xi Jinping even called Chancellor Merkel on the issue of the DPRK, the North Korea nuclear issue. And certainly Germany was being consulted. But after the election, people are going to be confused whether Germany will still be a player and a pillar for stability and issues related to that.
Most certainly, Germany will remain a player of stability and a safeguard of the international order.
I know you're an optimist, so are you talking as an optimist or are you talking as a diplomat?
Here I'm talking as a realist even, for the mere fact that whomever is going to join the coalition will remain committed to the foreign policy of Angela Merkel, but most importantly, as long as the negotiations for the coalitions are ongoing, the current government, the current administration will remain in place, which means everything which worked very well the last 4 years will continue working as swiftly up until a new government is formed.
But when a new government is in the process of being formed, the other players from around the world would tend to observe more rather than to work with more, because nobody knows what the potential is likely to be, Markus.
Yes, but I'd like to side you with Timo and say there's, below the party officials, there's of course the state secretaries and all the executive civil servants, and they will, I think, just plow on doing what they've been doing the last 4 years. Plus, in the campaign, except for the AfD and the very left-wing party, Die Linken, all the other parties had a broad consensus on all foreign policy issues.
Not necessarily so. For example, the issue of NATO. You got also the far left really against it.
Yeah, that's what I said.
It's coming from the origin of a very different political party.
Absolutely.
So
it was the extreme left and the extreme right who said we want a new foreign policy.
But
the rest
had
a consensus.
The extreme left in the coalition government. That's a possibility over there.
No. No, we will not have extreme left party in the new government. Definitely not. And not the AfD.
Okay.
That I would exclude.
Coalition agreements will be difficult. However, one thing is certain: the far right and the far left, which are the two parties which propose daring new foreign policy venues, for instance, dropping out of NATO, these two parties will not be part of the next coalition.
Having said that, though, there are other issues people are also looking at. For example, Germany, its role in Europe, it has a lot to do with the use of euro. And the AfD, of course, as an extreme far right, already talking about we shouldn't use the euro here in Germany. Of course, most people are against that, and yet we never know what is the future debate going to be and how severe that debate is going to be. Timo.
Well, here the coalition agreements really do play a role, however, a small role. If the Chancellor aims for a grand coalition, if she has to eventually, their policies towards the European Union will hardly change. If a Jamaica coalition is forming, which is the Conservatives, plus the Greens, plus the Liberals, Then the liberals will try to push on a bit on a harsher line, on austerity, on being a little bit more adamant, a little bit more fierce on southern European countries as Greece. However, the liberals, the FDP, they are a staunchly pro-European party still, and they are too small to really impact German foreign policy. They will amount to 10% of the parliamentarian seats, which means there will be 1/5 of the German government, which also means even with the liberals on board, foreign policy vis-à-vis the European Union will remain almost the very same.
If that is the case, there's another uncertainty, gentlemen, I have to point out, because Angela Merkel as the Chancellor, even though she has enjoyed the reputation of being a pragmatist, building consensus, this time her party losing 9%. People are going to have questions from outside Germany, questioning whether she is still as stable as she used to be, whether she is still going to be the leader, so-called, of this country that's really likely to bring everybody together. Markus, what do you think?
8 years ago, she had 33.5%.
People don't compare to 8 years ago. People compare
I know,
to
you're right,
4 years ago.
But don't underestimate her ability to reascertain her power structure in Germany, which is a precondition, as every politician knows watching her from the outside world, for being a strong leader in the international scene. And I think if she's able to form a government under these difficult circumstances, the re-estimation of foreign leaders of her will only be a positive one.
But she might be running into trouble. First of all, she lost the 9%. Secondly, the rise of the far right, as we mentioned earlier, are going to have a big problem on her. They're going to go against her on the immigration issues, the decisions she made. And people are going to have questions about Angela Merkel, saying, what kind of decisions has she made? Has she really made decisions for Germany? Why are we like this, even more divided than we used to be? I think these are all legitimate questions that probably Chancellor Merkel have to answer, Timo.
Well, it's a correct assessment. However, when you look at her strengths in the last 3 or 4 years, her success was not only grounded in her as being a successful politician, but rather her being rooted in a coalition which agreed on most foreign policy issues. So basically nobody was interested in getting rid of her because they agreed on most foreign policy issues. Meaning now the coalition might change, but the coalition is more or less based or resembling the very same foreign policy consensus. So if she is falling or if she has any problems to convince her voters, it might be economic matters, welfare state reforms. Here she might really have to fight for compromise consensus. But in foreign policy matters, it's very difficult to imagine she having too much trouble to convince key voting strata.
But you know, Timo, you are based your theories on the previous experiences, and we are seeing that society has been changing as a result of this election, the rise of the far right and the rise of the far right. And as a result, will the society still be together, as you suggested earlier, Timo?
Well, it's not, I'm afraid, society that matters here. Here, what matters is seats in parliament.
That's true.
And seats in parliament are still shared. 80% of the seats obtained are shared by pro-European forces. So it might be that more and more voters are disgruntled and join the far right in the next election. But this will not impact so much policy decisions taken in the next 4 years, maybe after.
Okay, let's think about Europe. We talk about Germany and France together, being this very strong leader of Europe and depending on one another to play different roles. But now you see Mr. Macron have to deal with the consequences of the recent reform he's trying to push in his country. And now Chancellor Merkel has to deal with, of course, the forming of the coalition. And therefore, are we going to see agenda about Europe being further delayed as a result of this? Markus.
It may be delayed by a month or two. And we all know Monsieur Macron has been elected in May. He's a little bit impatient. And we may have to drag his impatience along for another 2 months. But in essence, the differences between the French executive and the German executive, as we can see also in the campaign, are not that big. We're talking about a degree of centralization being a little bit lower in Germany as it is desired in France, but I think there can be compromise on that. And I would not underestimate the capability of civil servants in the meantime, whilst the political parties are struggling, to look at various options between France and Germany on the one hand, the rest of the European Union and the Commission. And my experience is that when there is political fighting for new coalitions, the civil servants do a lot of testing because they are the beneficiaries of the destruction of the politicians. So that is, being like Timo, the internal optimist, my take for the next 3 months of European politics.
I see. Even though I wouldn't interpret it the way that you just described it, but Timo, what would you say about Markus' view, suggesting there's always a stabilizing factor and the bureaucrats are exactly them?
I would entirely agree. That's the case. The reason being that the bureaucrats stem from the German center parties, which again are all pro-European forces. So even if the politicians are absent, the administration will kind of sine qua non continue on a pro-European consensus either way. So if German bureaucrats would be very right-leaning or very left-leaning, then this interregnum would be a time of concern. But German civil servants are rooted in the political center, which is staunchly pro-European.
Yeah, but when you think about the election and its impact on the German public, people might see that there's already violence as a result of the election taking place today in the city of Berlin. Even though they're minus, but still people are asking, is Germany still going to be as stable as it used to be? And if there is a question mark, it's going to have a lot of impact on businesses. It's also going to have an impact to a certain degree on the international relations. What do you say, Markus?
I think that the reactions that you've just alluded to, that we heard on the news today in Berlin, they are minor events. And Germany is usually, and has always been, a country for the last 70 years where the political discourse never went into any violent streak. Yes, we had terrorism in the 1970s, but that was still, compared to the long stretch of German history, an aberration more than a normal ingredient of German politics. And compared to other European countries, this country has been always very calm, to the point where a lot of German political participants said, we need a little bit more aggressiveness in our discourse. And I think what this election will bring about is a broad and deeply passionate discussion about how can we develop globalization further without tearing all our societies apart. It's not just the German one, there's the French one, there's the US one. It's happening all over the world.
Do you think Germany is going to look much more inward than it used to be, Timo?
No, it won't. The next government will be outbound as the previous government. However, their outlooking agenda needs to be, and there you have a fair point, needs to be accompanied by an agenda which is also inward-looking. Because as we just spoke about, there is a minority, not many, but a substantial chunk of German voters who do not feel globalization is working in their favor. And these voters, they do economically very well. They tend to be part of the affluent German voters, but they need to be convinced that globalization is not threatening their way of life. And here the Chancellor, and the Conservatives especially, because they tend to be considered the safeguardians of traditional customs and values, they have to do a way better job in making sure conservative German voters are convinced of that the way Germany is pursuing its foreign policy is lying in their very own interest.
All right. Moving forward, in the next 1 month or two, what would be the biggest question mark that would interest you?
The capability of the main political parties to not get too distracted by 13% of AfD, because that's exactly what those guys want. Where there are far bigger fish to fry, and the parties have big problems to solve. As you said, there's international trade disputes. North Korea, we have tensions all around the world in military terms. How do we deal with Russia? And they need to focus on these main political things. And the real question mark is, can they be able to not let themselves be distracted by 13% of populists? That's my big question mark.
What about your question mark?
I would think the most important question for the future of German politics, as much as European politics, is, are the Social Democrats joining government or not? Because if they stay in opposition, or if they join the opposition, they would be a pro-liberal, a pro-European party in the opposition, which would enable voters which are discontent with Angela Merkel to join an alternative to the left, to the center, and they wouldn't have to flock to the AfD at the far right. But the key question to me is, will Angela Merkel manage to form a Jamaica coalition? If so, this would be better news for German democracy and thus the stability of Europe as a whole.
A lot of uncertainties. What is certain is that we're going to have much more chances talking to you guys to try to figure out the latest situation. Timo Lochocki, thank you so much, and certainly our appreciation as well to you, Markus Kerber. And that is all the time we have for this special program, World Insight with Tian Wei, here in the city of Berlin. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. Just type World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team in Beijing and in Berlin, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for insights across China and certainly from around the world. Good night.